Today on our 2017 Nissan Frontier, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs. So here's what our airbags are going to look like installed once we have them on our Frontier. Now the whole purpose of an air spring is to help support our vehicle's factory suspension. That way it'll provide us with a more comfortable ride and help slow down that wear and tear on our other truck's components whenever we're carrying or hauling a heavy load. Now what really sets these apart from other styles of suspension enhancements, Timbrens for example, is the adjustability that we're going to have. So with these, we're going to be able to find that sweet spot that provides us with that comfortable ride in our truck, whether we're hauling something on the lighter side or something even on the heavier side. So these are going to be adjustable from 5 all the way up to 100 psi. That's a pretty large range, so you should have no problem finding the correct pressure that works for you in your particular situation. Now these are going to require just a little bit of maintenance. They are going to have a minimum pressure of 5 psi. So every now and again you're going to have to come to your truck, check the pressure, and make sure that you have that minimum inside of the bags. And to make keeping an eye on your pressures and making your adjustments even easier, you can pick up a compressor kit which will allow you to do all that from inside of the cab of your truck. So the bags are going to have a 3,200 pound weight carrying capacity. Now keep in mind, these aren't going to increase your truck's suspension capacity. That's just how much weight that the bags themselves can handle. Now it is always a good idea too to double check with your truck's owner's manual to see what your truck's weight capacity is. That way you don't exceed it. Now the bags themselves are going to be really durable and well built. Even the brackets are going to be really nice thick steel. So that way we're not going to have to worry about these wearing out over time. Now before we do anything to our truck, what I like to do is take some measurements on how level our truck is. That way we can get some baseline numbers and compare them after we get our airbags installed. So here at the front, from the ground to the bottom edge of our wheel well here, it's going to be right at 33.5 inches. And here at the back of the truck, we'll take that same measurement, and from the ground to the edge, it's right at 34 inches. Now we went ahead and put in a considerable amount of weight here in the bed of our truck. Now we can go ahead and take those measurements to see how it affected our suspension. And from the ground, edge of our wheel well liner is right at 34 inches. And here at the back, the ground to the wheel well, it's going to be right at 33 inches. So what we found out, since the back of our truck is sagging, it's going to raise the front end of our truck. And not only is that going to increase the wear on our suspension components, but it's also going to increase the tire wear because they're not going to be sitting perfectly level on the ground, and you're going to just wear them out a little bit faster. And we're going to lose steering and braking performance. Not to mention, if we're really loaded down, our headlights are going to be shining up, possibly into other motorist eyes, and not on the road where we want them. With all that weight in the bed of our truck and our factory suspension, we're going to run through the test course to see how it handles. We're first going to start by going over our bumps. As we go over our first few bumps, right away, it's a really uncomfortable ride in here. It almost feels like the suspension is pretty much bottoming out. Steering wheel's really loose as we go over them bumps. Just don't really feel like we have full control. So now we'll gain a little bit of speed and do some evasive maneuvering through our slalom course. So as I pick up and make these turns, wow, right away you can feel that weight really just throwing us around. That steering isn't nearly as responsive, and that's not a condition you would particularly want if you did have to do a little evasive maneuvering down the road whenever you're hauling your load. Now as far as the installation goes, it is relatively straightforward, but it is going to take a little bit of time. Let's go ahead and put everything on together now. Now what we can do is lay our components out and assemble our air spring. So we have our airbag here and our upper bracket. Now we're doing the driver's side, and you can identify the upper brackets, the driver's side will have an L imprinted on it. So there's going to be 2 holes here in the center. This larger hole is going to go around the threaded portion on top of our airbag, and this smaller hole will go right here in this pin to help keep it on line. So it's simply just set on top of it. We're going to take our nylon lock nut, thread that on, then we're going to tighten it down. Once it's tight, I'm going to use a torque wrench to tighten it down to the amount specified in our instructions. Now we're going to take our air fitting and thread that into the bag. So we'll just get this hand tight. Now when we tighten this down, we want to get it nice and snug, but we don't want to really crank down on it. Since this is brass, we don't want to risk cracking it. So once we get it down there a little ways and feel a little bit of resistance, we'll know we have it tight enough. Now if we flip our assembly over, we can take our lower bracket and loosely install it. Now the side of the lower bracket that's flat right here, we're going to want that to be on the same side as our air fitting. So it'll rest like this. Now we're just going to take our included bolt, and for now we're just going to leave this hand tight. That way we're able to kind of easily slide this back and forth if we need to adjust it once we have it on the truck. Now underneath the truck, what I went ahead and did was use a jack to jack up the frame. That way we can increase the gap in between our frame rail and our axle. That way it'll give us a little more room and make life a lot easier when we try to get the airbag in. Now if we move on top of our leaf spring, we're going to have this jounce bumper here that we're going to need to cut off to give us room to get our airbag in. Now before we do that, since our brake line is right here, what I did is just took a zip tie and zip tied it to another component here just to try to keep it out of the way. So what I'm going to use to cut this is a Sawzall, and I'm going to try to cut it just about flush with the top of our U-bolts here. Now up on our frame rail here, we're going to have a wire harness that runs along it, and it's going to be held in place with 3 push-pin style fasteners, and I'm just going to pop those out. That way the wire harness is free and we have a little more room to work. So I'll just use a trim tool, or you can use a flathead screwdriver. Just get behind it and simply pop those out. Now we can grab our air spring assembly and set that in place. So what we'll do is set the bottom portion on top of our leaf spring, just like that. Now when you put this in, you're going to want to make sure that the air fitting here is on the inside of the truck, the inside of the frame rail, as well as this flat portion down here. So we'll kind of let this hang out up here for a second. Then we're going to grab our bail bolt. Now this is the one that is wider than the others, and this one is going to go on this side of our bag closest to the back of the truck. So what we'll do is drop this around our frame rail, and we can just line up the corresponding holes in our upper bracket with our bolt. What we're going to do is take a flange nut, just get both sides started and hand tight for now. Then we can grab one of our smaller bail clamp bolts and run it around the frame. We're going to go behind the brake lines. And again, just line it up with the holes in our upper bracket. When you're trying to get this one, it can be a little tight, so just take your time. And you'll be able to get it. Just make sure you have everything lined up properly. So one thing I do want to point out, for me to be able to get our bolts up front hand tight on our bail clamp, I actually did have to reposition this back one to allow it to move more forward. So I just took those back off and actually ran our bolt through our two brake lines here, and then just put the bolts back on hand tight. And once that was repositioned, all I had to do was come back and put our nuts on this side hand tight. Now we're going to grab our bracket straps, and these are going to sit flat against our leaf spring. We're going to have some carriage bolts that'll drop down through our lower bracket into that axle strap. Now I noticed whenever you do that these bolts are going to be really long and come really close to interfering with some of our lines here. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of hold that tight in place and take a marker and just kind of mark this bolt at a more appropriate and manageable length. Now I'm going to pull these back out and cut them down shorter. And that'll just make life a lot easier when we're trying to tighten these, and we're not going to have to worry about so much interference here. Now to shorten up our bolt, I'm going to be using a cutoff wheel, but you could always use a Sawzall or something like that too. With our bolts now shortened, we can go ahead and loosely install our bracket strap and drop them down through. And on each end, we're going to take a flange nut and just get that on hand tight. And on the other side of our bracket, I did the same thing. Put our bolts in, marked them, trimmed them up to length, and then put our strap up against the leaf spring and just put those nuts on hand tight. Now we can tighten down our bail clamp bolts up top here. And when we tighten these down, we're going to want to try to run them down evenly. So the same amount of turns roughly on each side. Then we can do that same thing for our straps on the bottom. So this bolt here on the bottom of our airbag that we left a little bit loose, what we're going to do is find the straightest position in reference to our axle and tighten that bolt down. So it looks like we want to push the bottom of the airbag as close to the front of the truck as possible. We'll grab our wrench and get it tight. Now we're able to grab our torque wrench and get everything tightened down to the amount specified in our instructions. Now just a quick tip. One thing I do want to point out is that our hardware is relatively close to our brake lines. So what I like to do, just to help protect those lines a little bit, is just take a piece of vacuum line and split it down the middle. And if you need some of this tubing, you can find it here at etrailer.com. And simply just put it over that bolt. And that way, it'll just provide a little cushion from any vibration or anything if these lines were to touch our bolt. I'm going to do the same thing for this side as well. Take that line, cut it down the middle, and just push it in place. I just used a couple of zip ties to resecure our factory wiring harness here. And down here on our strap bolts on each side, there's also going to be some lines that run relatively close. So just to be on the safe side, again, I'm going to use that same hose. And this time I'm not going to split it down the middle, I'm just going to cut it to length and just push that over the end of the bolts. Now, if you're having a little bit of trouble getting these on, you can always just spray some soapy water, and that'll make it a little bit easier. Now we can take our airline tubing, get that plugged into our bags, and run it to our mounting location. Now, before you plug these into the fittings, you want to make sure that the cuts are really clean and straight. And so you don't want to use your traditional pair of snips. You want to either use a tubing cutter, a really sharp utility knife, or even a tool like this. So when you cut it, you want that cut to be really clean and straight. And this is a good example of how it should look. So I went ahead and ran my air tubing behind our wiring here. We're going to take the end of it and go behind our brake lines and get it plugged into the fitting. Now when we plug this in, what you're going to do is push downward on it to get it completely seated. And then to be sure of that, you can grab the tubing and pull up and push down a few times to make sure that it doesn't come out. You are going to have a little bit of movement, but that's normal and acceptable. So I grabbed the sheathing that comes with the kit, and I'm going to slide this all the way up our tubing, close to the fitting. That way it'll help protect that tubing from the brake lines and all the wiring right there. Now we can grab our included no drill bracket and figure out where we want to mount it. That way we know where we need to run our airline tubing. So I'm going to go right here on the hitch, and you'll just take the large zip ties, feed them through that bracket and around the hitch. You're able to just get it where you want it and pull them tight. So I went ahead and ran our airline, and this is the path that I took out of our bag up along our factory wiring. Just use some zip ties along the way to secure it. Now, whenever you do this, you want to make sure to avoid any hot or moving parts. And keep in mind too, our spare tire is going to need to go back up there. So you're not going to want to run it right in that path, you know, just try to envision that tire there, and we were able to run it around it. Came up here. I just took the extra, kind of coiled it up out of the way. Now with this end, we want to cut this straight, just like we did when we plug it into the bag. What we're going to do is take our Schrader valve air fitting, and this will work the same way. Just line that up, push it down, and move it up and down to ensure that it is completely seated. Now before we put this in the corresponding hole on our bracket, what we're going to do is take a flat washer, slide that over it, and then push it through. And on the other side, we'll get another flat washer and a hex nut. Once that's snug, and follow it up with a valve cap. Now, as far as the other side goes, that is set up the exact same way. So to get that one installed, you just repeat that same process as the driver's side. And same thing with the airline, same concept on how you plug it into the fittings and run it. Here's the path that I took to run the passenger side, out of our bag, up along our frame rail, and over again, coiling up that extra tubing and dropping it down to our Schrader valve fitting here. Now we can put some air into our bags. That way we can check for any leaks. Now we're going to grab some soapy water and spray down all of our fittings. Give it a second and inspect them. Now what we're looking for is bubbles to be rapidly forming. If that happens, that's going to indicate to us that there's a leak and that it's going to need some attention. The end of our Schrader valves here look good. So let's continue on with the system and spray down the rest of our fittings. Now that we verified that our system is completely sealed and not leaking, we're all good to go. However, if you do find a leak, what you're going to have to do is take that apart, recut your airline tubing nice and square, plug it back in, fill it up full of air again, and check it again. Now that we have our airbags installed, I put that same weight in the bed of our truck. Now we can take those measurements again. That way it'll give you an idea of how the airbags level out our truck. So here at the front, from the ground to the wheel well, it's right at 33.5 inches. So the front is sitting as it would with no weight in the bed of the truck. And here at the back, we'll take that measurement. It is 34.5. So it's actually a 1/2 inch higher up back here than it was factory with no weight. But that's okay, since our bags are adjustable, we'll be able to let a little bit of air pressure out and bring that down 1/2 inch right where we need it, like it was factory. So what all this means is even while you're towing or hauling a heavy load in the bed of your truck, you're going to be able to maintain that factory ride height, keeping your headlights nice and level, taking some of the strain and wear and tear off your suspension components, and you're not going to sacrifice any braking or steering performance. So now with our airbags on and all that weight in the bed of the truck, let's go ahead and run through our test course again. So we'll first start by going over the bumps. And as we go over these first few bumps right away, you can tell that our suspension has much more give. We're not getting thrown around as much in here. The steering wheel feels much more planted, and just overall like we're in more control. Now we can gain a little bit of speed and do some evasive maneuvering again through our slalom course. So as I make our turns, right away, huge difference, pretty much no body roll. I don't really feel like we actually have anything in the bed of our truck, to be honest with you. On the bumps, we did see an improvement, but in my opinion, doing these cornering maneuvers is where these bags are really going to shine. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs on our 2017 Nissan Frontier.